Ethan, can you answer me? Asked teacher Sarah for the 10th time that morning. The 8-year-old boy simply lowered his head, his eyes fixed on his school desk. Around him, the other third-grade students whispered among themselves, some laughing, others pointing discreetly at him. "He never talks, teacher," said Tommy, a classmate. "My dad says he's weird." Ethan pressed his lips even tighter, as if wanting to become invisible. His hands trembled slightly while holding the pencil, but no words came from his mouth. Sarah Johnson, 34 years old, watched the scene with her heart heavy. In her 12 years as a teacher, she had never encountered a case like Ethan Williams. The son of the most powerful judge in Chicago hadn't spoken a single word in 5 months since arriving at this public school. Ethan wasn't born mute. Until age 6, he was a normal child, quite chatty even, according to medical reports that Sarah had managed to access discreetly. The only child of Judge Robert Williams, one of the most feared and respected men in the state judiciary, Ethan grew up in a 4,000-square-foot mansion in Chicago's most exclusive neighborhood. Judge Robert was known for his extreme rigidity, both in courtrooms and at home. A man of few words and many demands, he commanded his family with the same iron authority with which he conducted the state's most complex trials. Ethan's mother, Victoria, was a fragile woman who had abandoned her career as a concert pianist to marry Robert. In recent years, she had spent most of her time locked in her bedroom, taking medications for anxiety and depression. She rarely spoke to her son, delegating all care to the household staff. The radical change in Ethan's behavior began after a traumatic incident that few knew about. 5 months earlier, during a formal dinner at the Williams house, Ethan had accidentally spilled a glass of red wine over his father's important legal documents. Robert's reaction was explosive and devastating. "You're worthless!" the judge had screamed, his voice echoing through the dining room. "You're good for nothing. Better stay quiet than cause more problems." Since that night, Ethan hadn't spoken another single word. Not to the staff, not to his mother, and certainly not to his father. It was as if his voice had simply disappeared, buried under layers of fear and shame. Sarah Johnson had grown up on Chicago's South Side, while Ethan lived in the exclusive North Shore suburbs. Daughter of a janitor and a grocery store cashier, she was the first in her family to complete college, graduating in elementary education from a state university, through tremendous effort and determination. At 34, Sarah had been teaching at Lincoln Elementary School for 12 years. She was known for her special dedication to children with difficulties, whether learning, behavioral, or complicated family situations. Her colleagues sometimes called her the guardian angel of the forgotten ones. Sarah lived alone in a small 2-bedroom apartment that she shared with her widowed mother, Mary, who was 70. She wasn't married. She had ended an engagement 5 years earlier when she realized the relationship would take her away from her calling to teach. "My mission is to take care of these children," she always said. On weekends, Sarah visited children's shelters and community centers throughout the city, offering free tutoring to underprivileged kids. She spent part of her modest salary buying school supplies for students who couldn't afford them. When Ethan arrived at the public school 5 months ago, it caused quite a stir. It was unusual to see the child of such a powerful family in a municipal institution. The principal, Margaret Davis, received a personal call from the judge. "My son needs to learn about the real world," Robert said in his authoritative voice. "This coddling phase is over. He's going to study at a public school like any normal child." What Robert didn't say was that the change was a form of punishment. Ethan had been expelled from 2 expensive private schools, not for bad behavior, but for not speaking at all. The directors of those institutions suggested the child needed psychological support, which the judge interpreted as a personal insult. On Ethan's first day at the public school, Sarah immediately noticed something was wrong. The boy arrived in an armored car with a private driver, wearing an impeccable uniform, carrying an expensive designer backpack. But his eyes told a story of profound sadness. "Good morning, Ethan," Sarah said with a warm smile. "Welcome to our class." Ethan simply stared at her for a few seconds and then looked down. He didn't say hi, didn't wave, didn't show any reaction. Sarah thought it might be initial shyness. In the first weeks, Sarah observed Ethan meticulously. During recess, he sat alone under a tree watching the other children play. In the classroom, he completed all activities perfectly. His handwriting was impeccable, his math problems were always correct, but all in absolute silence. The other children initially tried to approach him. "Want to play basketball?" asked Marcus, a classmate. Ethan shook his head no. "Want to share my sandwich?" offered Emma, a friendly girl. Ethan politely refused with gestures, but never spoke. Sarah talked to the principal about the situation. "We've called the parents several times," Margaret explained. "The father always says Ethan is just shy and that we shouldn't baby him. The mother never answers the phone." "Can I try a different approach?" Sarah asked. "I have experience with traumatized children." "Of course, but be careful. Judge Williams is not an easy man to deal with." Sarah began her own investigation. She talked to Williams' family staff who had children at the school, discovered information through acquaintances who worked at the courthouse. Slowly, she pieced together the picture of Ethan's family situation. She discovered that Victoria, Ethan's mother, had been hospitalized 4 times in psychiatric facilities in the past 3 years. That the judge worked up to 16 hours a day and was rarely home. That Ethan spent most of his time alone, under the care of staff who were afraid to cross him for fear of losing their jobs. The most revealing was a conversation Sarah had with Mrs. Rosa, the Williams family housekeeper whose grandson studied at the same school. "That boy is an angel teacher," Mrs. Rosa said with tears in her eyes, "but he lives like a little ghost in that big house. The father only yells at him. The mother lives drugged on medications. It's been 5 months since I've heard his little voice." "What happened 5 months ago?" Sarah asked. Mrs. Rosa told about the dinner incident, about the judge's explosion, about how Ethan had locked himself in his room for 4 days without eating or drinking water. Sarah decided to try a completely different approach. Instead of pressuring Ethan to speak, she began communicating with him through notes and drawings. In the first attempt, she left a little note on his desk. "Ethan, do you like to draw? If you want, you can draw something for me. You don't need to write anything." The next day, Ethan had left a drawing on the teacher's desk. It was a big house, but empty, with no people, just closed windows. In the corner of the paper, there was a small figure, a boy alone under a tree. Sarah was moved. It was the first time Ethan showed any form of voluntary communication. She responded with another drawing, a school full of children playing, with a smiling teacher in the center. On the back she wrote, "This is my favorite school. You make it more special." During the following weeks, Sarah and Ethan developed a complex system of nonverbal communication, drawings, notes, discrete gestures. Ethan began responding to questions through signals, 1 nod for yes, 2 for no, raised fingers for numbers. Sarah discovered that Ethan was extremely intelligent. Through drawings and symbols, he demonstrated understanding of subjects far beyond his grade level. He drew detailed maps, solved complex math problems, created elaborate stories through sequences of images. "He has a privileged intellect," Sarah commented to the principal, but he's emotionally destroyed. The other students began accepting Ethan's peculiarity. Sarah explained to the class that he communicated differently, but was equally intelligent and kind. Some children began including him in their games, accepting his nods and drawings as forms of participation. Through his drawings, Ethan began telling his story to Sarah. He drew memories: a small boy playing piano with a beautiful woman, his mother; the same boy playing alone in a huge house; a big, scary man yelling. A particularly touching drawing showed a dining table with 3 people: an angry man, a sad woman, and a frightened boy. On the floor, there was something spilled, and the boy had tears drawn on his face. Sarah understood that Ethan was processing.
Victoria secretly agreed to Sarah's plan. Twice a week, after regular classes, Ethan stayed at school for special sessions with his teacher. Sarah transformed a small classroom into an art studio. Paints, colored pencils, clay, papers of different textures. Ethan was initially hesitant, but gradually began expressing himself through colors and shapes. Ethan's first works were dark, full of black and gray. Houses without doors, people without faces, trees without leaves. Sarah didn't interpret or judge. She just offered more materials and silent encouragement. "You can paint whatever you want," Sarah would say. "This is your safe space. No one will judge, no one will yell, no one will say it's wrong." Gradually, colors began appearing in Ethan's work. First, timid brushstrokes of blue, then small touches of green, finally, explosions of yellow and red. The most significant transformation came during a particularly intense session. Ethan was painting a self-portrait when he suddenly stopped, looked at Sarah, and whispered, so quietly she almost didn't hear, "Teacher." Sarah felt her heart stop. It was the first word Ethan had spoken in 5 months. "Yes, Ethan," she responded softly, not trying to show her overwhelming emotion. I'm scared," he said, still whispering. Sarah knelt down to Ethan's level, tears streaming down her face. "What are you scared of, sweetheart?" "Of saying something wrong? Of Daddy getting angry again?" "Here with Miss Sarah, you can say anything. I will never get angry with you, no matter what you say." Ethan began to cry, a deep, liberating cry from someone who had held pain for a long time. In the following sessions, Ethan began speaking more, always whispering, always looking down, but speaking. He told about his father's constant yelling, about how he felt guilty for everything that went wrong at home, about the crushing loneliness of the mansion. "Daddy said I'm stupid," he told her one afternoon, "that I'm worthless, that he's ashamed of me." "Ethan," Sarah said firmly, "your father is wrong. You're one of the most intelligent children I've ever met, and more importantly, you're a good, caring, special person." Ethan also talked about his mother. "Mommy cries a lot. She takes pills and sleeps all day. Sometimes I go into her room and just watch her sleep." Sarah perceived that Ethan felt responsible for his parents' problems, an impossible emotional burden for an 8-year-old to carry. Sarah knew she needed to act more broadly. She discreetly contacted Child Protective Services, spoke with a psychologist specialized in childhood trauma, consulted with an experienced social worker. "This is a classic case of emotional abuse," the psychologist explained. "The child developed selective mutism as a protection mechanism. The father may not hit him physically, but he's destroying his self-esteem and confidence." Sarah also began working indirectly with Victoria. During the secret visits she made to the mansion, she encouraged Ethan to seek more effective treatment, to position herself more in defense of her son. "Mrs. Victoria, Ethan needs his mother. Even if it's difficult, he needs to know someone is on his side." The situation reached a breaking point when Robert discovered Ethan's extra sessions at school. On a stormy Monday, he appeared at the school with an angry expression, demanding to speak with Sarah. "Who do you think you are?" he shouted in the school hallway, his authoritative voice echoing through the walls. "How dare you interfere in my son's education without my authorization?" Sarah, though nervous, remained calm. "Judge Williams, I'm just trying to help Ethan. He's an exceptional child who needs emotional support." "My son doesn't need emotional support. He needs to learn to be a man, to face life without whining." "Ethan hasn't spoken in months, sir. That's not normal." "Better that way. Children who talk too much just get in the way. He'll learn to listen more and talk less." Principal Margaret tried to mediate the situation, but Robert was beside himself. "I want this teacher away from my son. She's filling his head with nonsense." It was at that moment something unexpected happened. Ethan, who had arrived at school and heard his father shouting from the hallway, appeared at the principal's office door. For the first time in 5 months, in front of his father, Ethan spoke. "Daddy, stop yelling at Miss Sarah." The silence was absolute. Robert was paralyzed, unable to believe his son had spoken and, more importantly, had positioned himself against him. "What?" said Robert, his voice now lower but still threatening. Ethan, trembling but brave, continued. "Miss Sarah is good to me. She doesn't yell. She listens to me." "Ethan," Robert began to say something, but his son interrupted him. "I don't want to be afraid to talk anymore. I don't want to stay quiet anymore." Ethan's courage left Robert completely disarmed. For the first time, he truly looked at his son, not as a project that was going wrong, but as a small, frightened child who needed protection, not toughness. "Ethan," Robert said, his voice now without its usual authority. I love you, but I'm very afraid of you," Ethan continued, the words coming out like a dam that had burst. "I don't want to be afraid anymore." Robert knelt down to Ethan's level, something he had never done. For the first time in years, he truly saw Ethan as a vulnerable child who needed protection, not toughness. "Son, Robert began to say, but realized he didn't know how to apologize, how to show affection. Sarah, sensing the delicate moment, approached. "Mr. Robert, Ethan just needs to know he's loved and accepted as he is. He's a wonderful child." What followed was a long and difficult process of family reconstruction. Robert, for the first time confronted with the impact of his behavior, accepted that the family needed professional help. Sarah suggested a family therapist specialized in power dynamics and trauma. Robert initially resisted, but the courage Ethan had shown made him reconsider everything. "I don't know how to be a father," Robert admitted in a later conversation with Sarah. "My own father was like that with me. I thought toughness was the only way to prepare Ethan for the world." "Mr. Robert, Ethan doesn't need toughness. He needs security, unconditional love, support to develop his own inner strength." Victoria also began more serious treatment for her depression. With adequate psychiatric support and therapy, she slowly began reconnecting with Ethan and positioning herself more actively as a protective mother. "Victoria, Ethan needs his mother. Even if it's difficult, he needs to know someone is on his side." With the family therapy support and a safer environment at home, Ethan began to flourish. His voice, once whispered and hesitant, became stronger and more confident. At school, he began actively participating in classes, making genuine friendships with classmates, demonstrating his brilliant intelligence without fear of being scolded. "Ethan has become one of the most participative students in class," Sarah commented with pride. "He asks incredible questions, helps classmates, shows extraordinary creativity." The art sessions continued, but now as expressions of joy, not trauma. Ethan painted rainbows, smiling families, houses with open doors and flowering gardens. Robert slowly learned to be an emotionally present father. He reduced his workload, began participating in Ethan's school life, learned to praise instead of just criticize. "Did you know your son writes beautiful poetry?" Sarah told Robert at a parent meeting. "He has impressive artistic talent." "Poetry?" Robert asked, surprised. "He's never shown me any." "Because he was afraid of your reaction. But now that you're reconnecting, I'm sure he'll share them." Victoria, with her depression more controlled, returned to playing piano, something she hadn't done in years. Ethan began asking his mother to teach him, creating a new bond between them. "Music is healing our family," Victoria told Sarah during a visit. "Ethan sings while I play. It had been years since I heard laughter in the house." The family therapy sessions revealed deep layers of dysfunction that had been transmitted through generations. Robert discovered his own father had been equally authoritarian and emotionally absent. "I swore I'd be different," Robert told the therapist, "but I ended up repeating exactly the same patterns." The therapist helped the family develop new forms of communication based on mutual respect and healthy emotional expression. Ethan learned that he could express his needs and feelings without fear of retaliation. Victoria discovered her depression was directly linked to the toxic environment at home and her inability to protect her son. With therapy and adequate medication, she developed strength to position herself as an active mother. With his new confidence, Ethan became a natural leader among his peers. His experience of overcoming made him especially empathetic with other children going through difficulties. "Ethan always helps shy classmates integrate," observed Sarah. "He has a unique sensitivity to perceive when someone is suffering." Ethan started a project at school called Circle of Friends, a group where children could